Welcome back all to the show. I'm your host Soli, and sitting down with me today is entrepreneur and host of the podcast Stand Up Comedy, your host and MC, R. Scott Edwards. Welcome.
Hey, that is so exciting. Yay. Good to be here, Sully. You got a lot of stuff going on with the Jacked Up Review Show.
Too
I'm
much.
just honored to be here.
Anytime. We were meeting on just one of those various like podcasts, like media, promo sites, and I was like, yeah, if he wants to keep telling just wonderful stories about just developing, working, and just hosting all these various stand-up concerts, I gotta hear all these, firsthand. I can share some of my stories, but I mean, I find it cool that from listening to your podcast, how you have actually kind of just you want to get into the meat and potatoes of it, but you also want to go into, why that each experience stood out, as opposed to, here's this one cool time, on my roster of
Right. So
stories.
let's give your listeners a little bit of a base, a little bit of a foundation. I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. I've opened over a dozen companies. Back in August of 1980, before you were born, I opened up the 12th. That's right, 12th full-time comedy club in the United States called Laughs Unlimited. And I've had a chance to work with several entertainers that went on to fame and fortune. And I own that. I built it up to a chain of comedy clubs, and then I sold it all in 2001. So I had it for about 21 years. And the experiences of working with those entertainers and that fringe of celebrity is what made Sully reach out to me, because the wacky things that happen when you're interacting with stand-up comics is always entertaining, right?
Right. Even when it's a bad night, it's pretty entertaining.
Oh yeah, no. In the comedy nightclub business, you get plenty of bad nights, and you just got to make the best of it and find the funny, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh man, and we'll get into it, but I mean, it's just cool to know that there's many who can just recount some of those days, like it's no different than the first day they went to high school. It's just or a music concert that they attended. It's some of it just stands out, just so just intriguing, and just seeing the evolution.
And I can name drop a few people, but what's interesting is that my club was an A room. I worked with people that already had some experience on stage, but they were before their fame and fortune. So, for example, in August of 1980, my opening act, it was his first gig out of Phoenix, Arizona. He made $150 for a whole week of work, was none other than Gary Shandling, who a lot of people will know from the Gary Shandling Show, the Larry Sanders Show. He hosted the Tonight Show for a while. I mean, Gary's done over 100 TV shows and movies. Sadly, he's passed on, but a great celebrity entertainer in movies and TV. And yet in 1980, he was making $150 working his ass off for me.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, everybody starts somewhere, right? I got a chance to work with Charles Fleischer. If you guys don't know the name Charles Fleischer, he was the voice of Roger Rabbit on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And he was really esoteric and unique on stage. But different people passed through a comedy club in the decades that I had it. Everybody from unknowns like Tom, and then I just had a brain fart. We'll say Jeff Jenna and Tom McTeague, and but also to Robin Williams and Jay Leno. So it's really exciting being on the fringe of show business,
right,
and being able to experience those interactions.
Oh, totally. And then even seeing all these other guys who became known for something totally different, especially in sci-fi horror roles, and you're like, wow. So Tim Thomerson left, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper, and Tales from the Crypt, did some stand-up briefly, but it is awesome just seeing so many of these cool cats just wearing multiple hats. I didn't even
Yeah.
mean to make that rhyme, but I just
No.
it's just like,
You're a
wow.
poet and didn't know it. So yeah, Sully, what it is that people use stand-up comedy to share who they are, get their funny out, find their creative side. And just a few, 1-2%, I call them the people that get the golden ticket, end up being rich and famous. Jerry Seinfeld worked for me, Ray Romano, Jay Leno, Dana Carvey, Bob Saget, Dave Coulier. These guys all got the golden ticket, all had great careers. But I could name a couple hundred comics that never became famous, but had great careers in entertainment.
So
A great
giant.
example. Right. So you've probably never heard of Ed Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So everybody should Google him. Ed Solomon was a stand-up comic. He was a terrific writer, but not a great performer. And I once told him he might want to focus on his writing. Well, fast forward 20 years, he was the writer of the script for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Mm-hmm.
He did all the Men in Black movies. He did Now You See Him movies. He's working on some new projects. He's got homes in England and the US. Huge movie script writer. I mean, rich and famous in the movie industry, and yet it all started from stand-up comedy. So that's just one example of somebody taking their experience in stand-up and turning it into something totally different.
Oh, totally. And I mean, because I mean, I've seen so many other filmmakers kind of get flack for that. It's like, okay, they'll make a cameo in their movie and it's like, oh, your acting's not there yet. Stick to what you do. And I mean, I think, but with comedy, you do have to, unfortunately, go on a stage and, you're going to have to fail to get good. And I think so many people, they just can't put that together when they see a movie or show. Is like, well, yeah, this filmmaker had to make this awful movie to make this great movie.
Well, yeah, and I've got a greatest story for you, Sully, that I think you'll enjoy. But you're making a great point, is that every time somebody sees a celebrity and they think, oh, overnight success, there's literally decades or many years of practice and trial and error and bombing, as you said, to get to the good stuff. That's how you take an idea and turn it into gold. But my story for you, I think, will be entertaining for your audience. Back in 1980-81, there was a very not famous sitcom. It was only out for a few years, called Bosom Buddies. And the star of that show had to do a stand-up comedy set. So a good friend of mine, Bob Saget, was a good friend of his, brought him up to my club, and he worked my club for a whole week. Bob Saget wrote material for him. I kind of showed him the ropes about working the stage, where to look, how to use the mic, interacting with the audience. And he put together a little comedy set. And then fast forward about 10-15 days, the episode where he did the comedy on the Bosom Buddies TV show came out, and we got to watch that, and we were all a part of it. Well, you may have figured it out, but most people wouldn't know. You might know the name. It was Tom Hanks.
Nice.
So Tom Hanks, who was not the Tom Hanks that we all know now 40 years later, was just getting his cutting his teeth in acting, and this was his very first gig on a sitcom called Bosom Buddies.
Yeah. I forget, I think it was Compound Comedy, which is hosted by the creator of Comedy Central. I think they just talked about how Bosom Buddies doesn't seem to be rerun so much, and they don't know if it's not as popular or political correctness or anything. But it was a start, like you say, for many big faces. And the co-star of that, I always forget his name, went on to do a bunch of other key recurring TV roles.
There was a lot of shows. I got a chance to work on stage with a young actress named Shirley Hemphill, and a lot of people don't remember the name, but she was one of the stars of What's Happening, which was a big hit in the 70s. And also she had her own show called One in a Million in 1979. But, if you were a comic actor in the 60s and 70s, by the time comedy hit its what I call the rock and roll stage, where it just really took off. So like I mentioned, Sully, when I opened my club, it was the 12th in the country in 1980. By 1985, there was one on every corner. It was like frickin' Starbucks, right?
Yeah.
All the old 70s discos became comedy clubs, and there were TV shows, Evening at the Improv, Live at the Comedy Store. I had my own show called Live at Laughs, and it really exploded. But there was a whole lot of very funny people before that were doing stand-up comedy, and Shirley Hemphill was one of those, along with several others.
That's great. And it's also just kind of fun to just kind of when you people forget when you interweave and see all the behind the scenes, a lot of it is you're standing around watching, observing, but you're learning. That is your education. That's your training.
Right. I mean, it's the way a lot of people get started. As I mentioned, Ed Solomon was a stand-up comic. He learned how to write a script, did some TV work, and ended up writing some, famous movies. Another one of my regular acts, Karen Anderson, used to actually teach comedy at my club to open micers, and she went on to be the head writer for the Ellen Show. So, you get a talent for something like writing comedy, and there's a lot of different roads you can take to find success. And she's just one example. Tim Bedore got his start at my club as a stand-up comic, and he ended up as a radio star. A lot of people may remember him. You can still hear him on the Bob and Tom radio show, which is nationwide.
That's great.
But Tim Bedore is a terrific stand-up comic, headlined all over the country, but his roots in his success were in radio. And who listens to radio now?
Right. You'd be surprised how even with all our internet taking over, there's still some people is like who are, I don't want to say they're backwards, but it's like they get most of their info still from radio, whatever it's slanted as. But then,
well, I think I'm interrupting you. I apologize. But much like podcast, when you're stuck in traffic, you're in your car, you're working out, radio or audio entertainment like a podcast are great ways to be entertained, learn something, get the news, like you said. So radio, I don't think will ever go away, but it's not what it was.
No,
for
it's very
the internet.
corporate now, and I listen to even more college radio than I do actual radio. But it's just funny how with when Sirius and the other satellite stations were kind of competing, and then I think around 06 was probably the first real podcast, but I mean, there was like other online audio clips of people would review their favorite shows, or YouTube was in its infancy, but it was just funny how it was like, even by 2016, there were still people who's like, well, what is a podcast? And now
2016, I think 2020. I mean, really, it's been amazing, especially when COVID came along, what it did to podcasting. When I started my podcast, there was already maybe 1 million podcasts out there. Now they're not all, very few are active, but there was a million that, much like YouTube, Apple said were out, were available. But that was 2019. Fast forward to now, 2022. There's something like 2.5 million. So it's more, it's up 150, 200%, no, 250%, just in a couple of years, because during COVID, when people were locked down, both producing and listening to podcasts just skyrocketed. Now, COVID's ended. A lot of those podcasts have gone away. They're still out there on Apple and Spotify, but they're not active. They're not adding episodes. They're not updating their info. People like you and I enjoy doing it. We have a niche. We have a group of listeners. And so we keep doing it because we're giving something to our listeners. They're giving something back to us. And we're doing it for our own entertainment. It's somewhat selfish, but a lot of fun. I love podcasting.
And it kind of is fun, kind of giving yourself your own homework. It's like, hey, I'm going to research this topic this week or prep for this. And it's fun. I don't mind completing it or half-assing it. It's fun, but yes, like you say, it is, you kind of, to put on a good show, you really have to love what you do, and you really do have to set your own deadline.
Well, for me, Sully, I had those chain of comedy clubs and sold them in 2001. I went into the auto industry and had some success there. Then I ended up owning an insurance agency, had some success there. I recently sold it and kind of semi-retired. But what was amazing about podcasting for me is that I had so much fun in the 80s and 90s working with Jay Leno and Ray Romano and all these people that we've name dropped, Paula Poundstone and Diane Nichols, many, many others, that the podcast, my podcast, Stand Up Comedy, your host and MC, listen today, is
Collect
a
them
way
all.
for me to reconnect. You know, I'm interviewing old comics, some famous, not so famous. I got a chance to interview Kelly Monteith out of England, Amazing Jonathan in Vegas. I just did Dennis Blair out of New York and Vegas. And, so the podcast is a way to reconnect with that time in my life that I really had a lot of fun. I mean, I've been pretty blessed and lucky to have fun my whole life. That's been my goal. I don't have any money, but I have a lot of fun.
Nice. Well, and like you say, you're not just reliving it, but you're also just kind of you're reconnecting with some people who you might have seen at those. Were there any comedians who you would see at other comedy clubs in the area and be like, hey, you would give them an invite. Hey, you can come perform by my store anytime.
Well, when I joke about being on the fringe of show business, I'm in Sacremento, California. It's the central part of the state, but we are not a hub of entertainment, right? There was a big comedy scene in San Francisco. There was a big one in LA, one in New York, one in Boston. But I traveled to San Francisco and Los Angeles on a regular basis to scout talent. And if there was somebody I thought would fit my audience and fit my club, yeah, I would approach them and say, hey, you need to be working for me. And that's how I got a lot of talent. The other way people got on my stage this was back when there was a thing called a VHS tape. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a 1/2-inch wide tape and
it's a
you had
thing.
to put it in a machine. Yeah. So people would send me VHS tapes, samples of their sets. And I would get hundreds of them every month. And I didn't have time to watch them. I had one of my minions watch them and then pick out the good ones that they liked. And then I watched those.
His taste. Yeah.
Right. And then I would go through it and pick the ones I wanted to book. But what's great about a comedy club, and there's still many out there. Of course, when I opened, there was 12. Then there was like 500. Now there's still maybe 200 great clubs. My club that I opened, Laughs Unlimited, is still operating. So not only was it one of the first, it's now one of the oldest at 42 years old. So anybody listening, you should go and visit a stand-up comedy club. There's nothing like live comedy where you're a part of the show. The audience becomes engaged with the entertainer. It's great entertainment, but also consider getting on stage yourself because it's very healthy emotionally and cathartic to get on stage, figure 2 or 3 minutes. You're probably going to bomb, but give it a shot, man. It's really opens up your soul.
Absolutely. And I haven't had near as many experiences as I would love to list. Let me ask you if you've seen any of these comedians live. Have you seen Greg Proops?
Oh yeah.
Bobby Lee?
No.
TV. Okay. And Wayne Brady.
I know of him. I have not seen him live.
No, that's fine.
Know who he is.
And don't get me wrong, you got a way better spreadsheet than me. But who have been some of your favorites that are on the wall of shame that is noted on the store as having all the headshots of those who have previously performed?
Well, what's great about being the producer of a show. So I wasn't a comic, but I was on stage every night as the MC. But I was the producer, so I could book people that I wanted to interact with.
Give them an opening intro.
So I get my sense of humor from my father. So for him, I booked people like Soupy Sales and Pat Paulson, which a lot of your audience may not remember, but were big comics in the 50s and 60s. For me personally, Robin Williams worked my stage twice. I'm a big Monty Python fan. I had Graham Chapman from Monty Python work for me. One of my biggest thrills, you may remember the rock and roll song called Earache My Eye from Cheech and Chong on the Big Bamboo album. Well, I had Tommy Chong on my stage twice playing that song live. I mean, freaking awesome.
That is great.
Yeah. So you get a chance to work with your heroes. You get a chance to meet people. I became good friends with Harry Anderson, who people may remember from Night Court and Cheers. Great magician. And we did a lot of hanging out and doing stuff. Famous ventriloquist Jay Johnson, who was on the TV show Soap in the 70s, was a regular at my club. Him and his character Bob. And so there's so many experiences that happen. I'll tell you a great story. In the early on 1981, I was still in the small banquet room I started in before I opened a brick and mortar club. And Gary Shandling had gone from opening act to headliner very quickly because he was so funny. But it was a Wednesday night. There's maybe 18 people in the audience. And Gary's about halfway through his set. And this guy gets up and goes to the restroom. Right? Gary goes, wait a minute, that's way too high percentage of the audience. He goes, come with me. Gary takes the 17 other people down the hall and into the men's room. And this guy's standing at the urinal doing his business. All 17 people, men and women, cram into the men's room. Gary goes and stands right behind the guy and just starts doing his set like nothing had changed. It was a once in a lifetime thing. It was incredibly funny. Those 17 people will never forget that happening in their life. And the guy, the poor guy trying to do his business, is looking like this and really nervous. And we made sure he washed his hands for damn sure.
Kind of a foreshadow to his, what became his later, breaking the fourth wall kind of shows.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? That was a premonition.
I'm going to interact with you. He might as well be the first guy to do that before someone else does it.
Yeah, no. Gary was a genius comic and went on to be a talented actor. And there's been so many of those stories that we got a chance to work with. People may know Brian Posehn from The Big Bang Theory. Brian is a local Sacremento guy that got his start in comedy at my club. And I sat in the audience with his mom as he was doing some of his first sets on stage. And his mom was so funny. He goes, oh, Brian shouldn't say that. That's too nasty, Yeah. I go, it's okay, Mrs. Posehn. This is part of the process. But Brian has gone on to fame and fortune as an actor, but his roots are in stand-up comedy.
He was always one of those, I never knew his name. I was like, hey, that's the guy with the dry sense of humor on Just Shoot Me. And it is funny.
He's done a few shows, but Big Bang really kind of,
I think that was like the sixth part of his career. And it really, now he's immortalized. If you don't know me from this and the Pixar animations and even Conan appearances, then who the hell are you? But it is just funny how.
So who do you like, Soleil? Who in stand-up comedy? Is there anybody from TV or stage that you've enjoyed? You ever listen to George Carlin, any of the classics?
Yeah, I've many of the classics, just as well as just even just going far back as anyone who was in a comedy duo, whether it was Abbott and Costello and the Marx Brothers too.
And Bill Cosby had famous albums. I mean, he has a bit of a history now, but back in the 60s, he was a comedy god.
I loved all kinds, but I take it with the roasts. I know this isn't necessarily stand up, but still just putting on a scene in front of various people. I gotta applaud Don Rickles for his sense of just kind of jabs.
It's so funny that you mentioned Don Rickles. He is one of those people that I always respected in comedy. He was famous in movies and TV and did stage shows in Vegas and Tahoe and all that. And yet what's interesting about him is that imagine him doing his material in today's audience. Yes. They wouldn't get it. He picked on everybody, but he picked on everybody with the idea that, hey, we're all in this crazy world together.
How about I be the angry granddad?
Yeah, I'm going to pick on the African Americans, the gays, the Japanese, the Chinese. He picked on the Italian. I mean, he picked on everybody. But his theory was, we're all human beings. Let's all laugh at ourselves, right?
Right.
Don Rickles in today's woke society and counterculture, and they would tar and feather him. I mean, they wouldn't accept the fact that sometimes you have to laugh at yourself.
And he was doing the tricky avenue is like, I think any comedian who probably, did a knockoff that was similar to him, they kind of went just for the mean. And he was, like you say, he was about just reminding everyone about their imperfections and organizing his tone. Because like you say, George Carlin and even Richard Pryor, were all about just kind of making fun of various society misfires. And I sincerely think that Rickles kind of wanted to just be the guy who just, comes here after work, but instead of complaining about his day job, he kind of mocks you a little bit. It's like, I'm your friend.
Right. And it was all meant, and it was all meant in good fun. There's a comic.
It really was.
Yeah, there was a comic that worked for me. Bobby Slayton. He was called the Pit Bull of comedy. Bobby Slayton is tremendously funny. Done a lot of stage work, a little bit of TV, a couple movies.
Oh wow!
But he was ruthless on stage when it came to interacting with the audience. Always funny, but he never held back anything. And he was never dirty per se. He would just kind of an attack personality. And one of the reasons he retired recently was that it just got kind of stupid. People, again, couldn't laugh at themselves,
We'll return after these messages.
Hello and welcome to Culture Shocked, the pop culture podcast brought to you by four aging millennials and our outdated opinions. Join us every Tuesday as we discuss movies, TV, games, and even music, new and old.
Dude, what do you think you're doing?
Are you seriously trying to record a promo without us right now?
Well, yeah.
Dude, you can't just do the promo by yourself. Who's gonna listen to that?
Yeah, and you probably haven't even told them that we're a pop culture podcast where we always agree on everything. For instance, the Sam Raimi trilogy, easily being the best of the Spider-Man movies.
No. But I think we can all agree that Jaws is a classical masterpiece.
Nope, don't like that. But we do all agree that the sequel trilogy of Star Wars is the best in the Skywalker saga, right, guys?
That comment is so ridiculous. I don't even know where to
Anyways, that'll do it from all of us here at Culture Shock. Thanks for listening.
Do you ever find yourself thinking about who would win in a fight between Goku and Superman? Hi, I'm James Gavsey, and on the Who Would Win show, me and my co-host Ray ignore anything important happening in the outside world and debate fictional battles between characters from comics, movies, and video games.
We got a new show every week, and almost always am I the winner.
Yeah, not true, Ray.
In the past, we've discussed such matches as Captain America versus Darth Vader, Solid Snake versus the Iron Giant, classic matchups like RoboCop versus Terminator, and even the Muppets versus Sesame Street.
That one was crazy. So if you're a fan of geek culture and love a spirited debate, check out the Who Would Win show wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out at whowouldwinshow.com.
We let things pile up in the DVR. We add them to our queues. We wait for the DVDs and Blu-rays. We time shift. The Time Shifters Podcast. Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, superheroes, comedy, action, film, television, maybe some not-so-current events. Find us on iTunes or at timeshifterspodcast.com.
Cool thing about Blind Knowledge is we are in multiple countries. We are worldwide all across the globe. We are in the US, we are in the UK, we are in Canada, Germany, India, Japan. We're in Australia, y'all. BlindKnowledge.com. Now back to the feature presentation.
Funny, this new woke society is so bizarre that for example, as an MC, I might pick on a guy that's got an ugly sweater, and the guy knows he's wearing an ugly sweater. I'll say something like, oh, hey, what Walmart had a sale, or one crappy sweaters, and I'm picking on the guy, and he's laughing because he knows he's, some chick made him wear that goofy sweater. But what's different
us.
Yeah. But what's different about today is that he might get upset. He may or may not. Usually they never did in my case. But in today's woke society, there'll be somebody across the room that would get upset saying, oh, you're abusing him and you're hurting his feelings because of the sweater he's wearing. So I'm going to get mad. And it's like, what the frick? It has nothing to do with you. I mean, that's some of the changes in the audience.
I've seen
comedy's trying to adapt to.
I think it was Anthony Jeselnik, I think, is one of the few who can still kind of push everyone's buttons without actually having to deal with any bullshit. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No, but I believe you.
Okay, so he's done a lot of recent Comedy Central roasts. He's had a lot of Netflix specials, and he's what was it? I think he had a hysterical bit, I think, when he was roasting Charlie Sheen and just making fun of how he had taken over Spin City, and it was just like, the reason you had a show is because God hates Michael J. Fox. It's like anybody else would have said too far, and he just knows how to kind of unleash that and then kind of rein you back in. It's like, hey,
right. Well, I think people like roast. Well, I think people like roast, which, by the way, got their start back in the 50s.
Yeah, before New York Friars. Yeah.
Right. The Friars Club. Oh, good. I thought you might be too young to know that.
No.
Yeah, it started off at the Friars Club and went on and ended up on TV. But what was unique about a roast is you had permission to pick on somebody.
Correct.
Right.
And
now,
they had agreed to be difficult. There. And
right.
It's part of the whole, well, if you got an issue, say it to my face. It's like, okay, we're all going to be in a room. And at the end, you'll get to
Louis Anderson. Hey, I'm fat. Hey, it's just all part of the entertainment. But I never got involved in roast per se. I always thought that was more about the people doing the roast and the roastee than the audience. I'm all about entertaining an audience. And getting a chance to work with Ray Romano and some of the other people that really connected with an audience. Jerry Seinfeld was probably one of the best. Dana Carvey was interesting case. Do you know Dana?
I feel he was so underrated. I ship boulders anytime I see him in town, and they haven't even updated like his bio and headshot. I'm like, guys, you got to get a more recent photo if he's going to come into town.
Well, Dana got his start out of the Bay Area. He's a musician. He's an impressionist. He's a terrific stand-up comic. He was on my TV show twice. He worked my club many, many years, but this was all before he became famous. But a great side story. He was working my club. It was a Thursday night after the show, and we're hanging out in the jacuzzi having drinks. And I could tell that Dana was a little nervous. And I said, hey buddy, what's going on? And he goes, well, I'm really excited, but I'm kind of scared. I just got off the phone with Lorne Michaels and they want me in New York on Monday to showcase for Saturday Night Live. And I go, man, that's a great, amazing. And he goes, yeah, but I'm, nervous as hell about it. So we joked about it and had a few more drinks. And of course, he flew to New York, got Saturday Night Live. The rest is history. Wayne's World and movies and TV. And now he's got his own podcast called Fly in the Wall with David Spade.
Yeah.
And you can find that.
Conan.
Yeah. I've got a stand-up comedy podcast network.com. You can go to, and it has 16 different podcasts by stand-up comics. And his is one of them. So if you need access to his podcast, go to Stand Up Comedy Podcast Network.com and check out Dana Carvey's podcast. You'll find many, many others, including mine. But Dana's had an amazing career. He's so talented, and he brought many characters to Saturday Night Live, but he was doing those before on my stage. And got to see him get developed, and that was amazing. The church lady, goes way back, and Choppin' Broccoli, his famous song, he was doing those years before Saturday Night Live.
Oh, totally. And I feel like he had an interesting retrospect of just the world, because there's just so many others who kind of would just do the same formulas and everything, and he kind of just went for more just, how goofy can I be, and then show that I'm not an average Joe, but I'm also not crazy weird. And his impressions of just so many just other people are just phenomenal. I'm sure you've heard his R-rated version of Jimmy Stewart.
Oh yeah, no, I've heard everything he's ever done, and he was so good. Another person that people don't know is a great impressionist, because he's turned out to be a super duper good actor. But Kevin Pollak worked for me for many years. Great impressionist.
Glad you got to meet him.
Kevin Pollak, has been in 24 movies and all big hits. I mean, he's an incredible actor, but people don't realize he got his start in stand-up comedy doing impressions.
Yeah. Everyone else just thinks, oh yeah, a satellite radio host. I'm like, well, it didn't happen overnight. He did acting in between comedy and stand-up, and now it seems like others just seem to know him just for his appearances. I think just with Family Guy and making imitations of William Shatner, and it's like, no, not even close.
Well, it's so funny. He's a huge poker player, so a lot of people think, oh, he's an entertainer that plays poker, but that was just one of the things he enjoyed to. He played poker back in the day, but of course now he can play for a lot more money.
Oh yeah.
But so there's a great lifestyle in stand-up comedy. I've been blessed to be on the fringe of it and being able to experience it. As a producer, I was able to help bring together people, give them an opportunity to hone their craft and build a career, whether they became famous or not. It's been an amazing life, and I get a chance to share that through the podcast. And if you go to that podcast network website, there's videos.
Everyone, please do Stand Up Comedy Podcast Network.
Yeah, there's videos on all these guys on stage back in the day. There's a free one of Dana Carvey doing Choppin' Broccoli with his brother's band. That's amazing. But audio bites in all these podcasts. So lots of great interactions with comedy. And I recommend to your audience that if they like a good laugh, which is very healthy for you, get a chance and visit a live comedy club or listen to a good comedy podcast, because laughing does release the endorphins, and it's very healthy for you.
I always tell everyone when they ask for advice, I say, watch or listen to something that makes you laugh, watch or listen to something that makes you learn something about the world, and then watch or listen to something that gives you a happy ending. 3 things that you gotta do.
There you go. You've got a plan.
I often keep out the last off color part because racist society. But
hey,
I gotta ask you
endings.
And
the children don't know what we're talking about. They're thinking, well, the princess runs off with the knight.
I always
That's
have
a happy ending.
It's the ending of Star Wars. You get it, the Death Star explosion. Who's one comedian that before you leave this earth, you want a chance to just meet them one more time and just say, hey, I'm glad I was able to host you, pre-fame at my club?
I would have to say that I get often asked who was your favorite comic. And when I've seen the hundreds I have, I can't pick a favorite, but there was one that always stood out, and nobody will know his name. But if you go to the Googler and put in Larry Miller, he has done hundreds of TV shows and movies. As soon as you click on the Google Larry Miller, you'll recognize him.
Oh, yeah.
But he was one of the best storytellers. And I don't even know how he'd do today, because he could tell a 12, 15-minute story and have you laughing all the way through. And today, with the young audience's short attention span, I'm not sure how they do with it. But he had a great bit called The 12 Stages of Drinking. He had another bit about snow skiing. that took 10 minutes to do, but were absolutely hilarious. There's one he rarely did about he ended up on a film as an extra and ended up doing a getting hit by a sack full of books, and everybody was telling him what a great job he was doing blocking it. And he goes, blocking it? He was actually getting hit by this bunch of books. But anyway, Larry Miller would be the guy that people should look into. Some of his comedies on my shows, my podcast, but he's the guy that if I could sit down with him and thank him. Sadly, he had a minor stroke a few years ago. He's had to retire, and hopefully he's doing well. I
hope, man.
But he's an amazing young man, and people should keep an eye out for him. By the way, he was made famous as the salesman in Pretty Woman. They called it the suck up guy.
Oh yeah,
Pretty Woman, and that right there helped put him on the map. But of course, he did the Tonight Show with Johnny and the Letterman Show. He's done tons of TV shows.
Oh yeah, it's even funnier when you realize, audiences today might know him for Richer or Poor or the Nutty Professor movies, but I remember, I think he gave a funny interview. He was like, I had no idea someone saw me playing a rapist clown in Carnival of Souls. That movie sucked. And I find it even funnier how he's one of the free titular characters of the firm on Boston Legal, but you barely see him because his character he has even more scandals and is even a bigger nitwit than the rest of them.
Right, a bigger criminal, and thus a lawyer. No, but it's true that Larry was a gifted entertainer, turned into a terrific actor. But again, as I've mentioned 3 or 4 times, it all started with stand-up comedy. So one of the reasons I love this art form is that you can do so much with it. Whether Charles Fleischer doing cartoon characters, Carlos Alazraqui does many voices he started off as the Taco Bell dog in the 80s.
Yes.
He's one of the stars of Casa Grande, which is a big hit right now on Comedy Central. But Carlos was also in Reno 911, the TV show and the movies, and it all started with stand-up comedy. So again, I think I've given 6 ideas of how stand-up comedy led to fame, success, and great entertainment value, all in different ways. Whether you write movies, write TV scripts, whether you're doing cruise ships, doing TV, doing movies, whatever it is, it all starts with stand-up comedy.
It really does. See your vulnerable point, see where you might fit in. You might say, hey, fuck it, I don't want to do the performing, I just want to do the writing. It's kind of what Paul Mooney kind of did for Pryor and later Dave Chappelle.
Mooney was really good on stage, but he was just so angry and very racist, and I worked with him a couple times and I just wasn't comfortable around him. He was one pissed off asshole, I'll tell you, but a good comedy writer, and he wrote for the people that you mentioned and had some great success.
He knew how to kind of just translate that.
I found it interesting how Paul Mooney.
I just had always seen just rare, stand-up things. I think he went to the Comedy Store quite a lot, and I would see a lot of those videos on YouTube. But I was always familiar with just occasional, just rare HBO comedy screenings. But it was interesting how...
he's done Comics Unleashed and a few other shows, but he was, again, somewhat of an angry comic that didn't get a lot of TV because his material was pretty... rich with
stereotypes, but I mean,
but he was funny and he was a good writer, and Richard Pryor appreciated him, and several other people he wrote for. But it was interesting that you knew who he was. That's a name
we're not
I rarely mention. Paul worked for me, but I rarely mention him. We had a really terrific comic who was so funny, and he was one of our crowd favorites. A guy named Vince Champ. Everybody should Google him. He's now doing life in prison because after he quit working the clubs, he became a college circuit professional, and he was
so like
raping
Lenny Bruce, he was going for the underground kind of.
Yeah, but he was raping women in all these different college towns. And because he was always changing towns, it took the cops years to catch him. But when they did, I mean, he'll never see the light of day. But here's a weird case, Sully, that you would not normally talk about in a podcast. I've rarely mentioned it. But Vince Champ was one of my favorite headliners. He did my TV show. He was a great comic in the 80s. And then something happened. And in the 90s, he quit working clubs and just worked colleges. And all of a sudden, we find out years later, he was this rapist. It's like, oh my gosh, he stayed at my house. I mean, it's just something happened. Luckily, the cops caught him. Yeah. But if anybody's looking for an interesting story to research, go to the Googler and put in Vince Champ. It's a fascinating story.
And
I've only shared that a couple times, Sully. So this is
I know what you mean. It is just it's kind of when you meet people at work, and then years later you just find out all these other stories. Wow, he said that to you. He did this and that, and you're just like, wow, how did I work with someone who's so
you
infamous?
think you know somebody, and then you find out you don't. I mean, a lot of people have different issues and what I call piccadillies, and a lot of entertainers had emotional issues. Most of them are, actually insecure and depressed, and they use stand-up comedy as a way to connect with people and express their angst. But Vince Champ took it, way too far and got what he deserved. But we've had several comics over the years that have committed suicide, or a lot of them became alcoholics or drug addicts because they have issues and they tried to use comedy as kind of like their therapy, and it doesn't always work. And then the demons get them, So, but that's not just comedy. I mean, that happens in all the industries, which just makes comedy unique, is that these people that you find out later on had these bad things happening. We're on stage, on stage, they're funny, engaging people.
1,000%. And you've thrown out some good names there that have were kind of hot for a minute and then kind of just went their own way. But it's interesting too how when some of them we've seen have become, everyone's still shocked when some of them are really good actors. It's like, yeah, because now they're getting to kind of address some of the issues they had, outside of the performing on stage. And
and I'm sure nobody in America realizes that movie stars and TV stars have some sort of piccadilly or issue, right?
Issues be damned.
They're all perfectly normal.
Somehow they're larger than life. They can't have any issues. Now, dare I say,
a Kardashian.
So now, dare I say, have you ever seen or heard of Frank Conniff?
No.
Okay, so he is best known for being TV's Frank on Mystery Science Theater, but he started out with stand-up, and he's gone on to write for plenty of other shows like Freaks and Geeks, and he's still riffing bad movies and appearing on other wacky shows and podcasts. I asked him, is like, there's some great minds that took their material from the stage and were able to pitch so many hit shows. And, he was able to fortunately write for various shows like Spring the Teenage Witch and Drew Carey Show. And I asked him, is like, so do some executives, when they pass on a comedy pilot that you discover years later and is it that they just didn't get the humor? And he's like, no, more often than not, they might be full of themselves, but they get the joke. It's just they don't know how to market it if it's a slow buildup. What have been some of the best slow builds for you and personally, where you're just like, wait for it. Oh, gotcha.
Well, no, you mentioned Mystery Science Theater, which most people have heard about and started back in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. The original star and creator of that was one of my regular acts, Joel Hodgson.
Hey, there we go.
And Joel was so creative. He was like
comedy.
Yep, he was like a child on stage. Everything was a toy. In fact, a lot of people don't know that when he first kind of slipped away from stand-up comedy was that Mattel offered him a job as a kind of designer and critic of toys, what would work and what wouldn't work. So he was kind of on the fringe of the toy industry. He was a prop comic that was really unique, very entertaining, very childlike. And then he was so successful when he would get on a talk show, right, that he got to create his own show, Mystery Science Theater, and that ended up being a huge success, carried him for many, many years. And then he kind of retired and then he brought it back. But Joel Hodgson is another one of those people that people probably wouldn't know the name, and yet he had a huge impact on entertainment in the 80s and 90s. So I was glad that you mentioned Mystery Science Theater, because Joel was another one of those guys that took stand-up comedy and took a whole different path to success.
Oh, so underrated. And there's just so many times where you kind of just wish there was more comedians like that, because you'll see other people try and kind of imitate him as Steve K, but they're just doing the, hey, let's just talk, during a movie. But I do feel like they miss out on, yes, like you say, his prop comedy. And I do remember the story. Yeah, Mattel, one of the biggest toy companies next to Hasbro, offered him a gig.
Right. And he took everything a little bit more, I use the word childlike, but it was really, he had a fun twist to his personality, and he created the robots for Mystery Science Theater and was a very funny writer, found the funny in everyday items. And, that was his gift. But there's a lot of people that have different, we were talking about Dana Carvey or Kevin Pollak that can hear somebody talk and then turn around and mimic it, or somebody like, Jay Johnson, who's a terrific, or Dave Strassman, or terrific ventriloquist. Andy Gross, still touring, just did a whole month of shows in Florida. A terrific ventriloquist, and he's famous on the internet as the Split Man. You want to see something crazy, Google Andy Gross Split Man, and he's got something like 5 million hits on his he's a magician and a ventriloquist, and as a magician he does some wacky things, and is a huge internet star. But
man,
you never know where stand-up comedy is going to take you, and getting a chance to share some of these early stories about a career and art form that I love is I'm very appreciative. Thanks, Sully.
And it's kind of where that's kind of going now, is like, if you're not sure if it'll work on stage, you can still use the video in the best possible way instead of just bullshitting.
Right. Well, that's the good and the bad. Internet has good things, internet has bad things. But one of the good is that even people that don't get a chance to get on stage or have some creative release they want to put out there and see if there's an audience for it, YouTube and the internet and TikTok, I guess. I'm too old for TikTok, but people have finding ways to express their creative side. And I do have
to filter it out to find the best ones. Is like, okay, my sister will send me 10. I'm like, okay, I'll watch one of those. Go, give me your best one.
Right. Yeah,
just like any comedian, give me your best material.
Well, like anything else in the world, things get abused.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If we could only show the good on YouTube, it would be a lot more fun. But no, remember, you might be too young, but MTV, when it first came out, the running gag was that the next one will be good, right? Everybody watched MTV for the next one that might be good, right?
If you hated this, you're really gonna love this. It can't be worse.
You go through a bunch of crap music videos, and then there's one by somebody you really like, and all this waiting was worthwhile. But that was like the beginning of MTV. Was the next one will be good.
Oh man. Oh, it's not easy, but I think it'll get better. I think people will get tired of it, and that's often where, they channel their cynicism and they come up with even better stuff.
Yeah,
it's
easy
to get annoyed when you're having people, like you say, abuse a format or just oversaturate it to where now you need something different now.
Well, I've told the story a couple times that when I started in 1980, there was maybe 200 comics, and by 1985, there was maybe 2,000. But the problem is you had to go through 2,000 to find the good ones, right? It wasn't that hard to find the good ones when there was only 200. But it exploded, much like the internet, much like YouTube, much like TikTok, much like, whatever you're into. And you just have to work with it and use your sensibilities to find what tickles your funny bone, right? Everybody's got something different. A lot of people like these silly cat videos. I mean, I don't freaking get it, but if they like it and that entertains them, go for it. Oh, that cat is so cute.
Right. That's kind of what cats do, but yeah.
Well, anyway, that could be a whole nother show. The dynamics of the unique personalities on well, I don't even know about comedy, just on the world with what's going on, right?
Video or script to video or comedy to video. And it would definitely be a good way of just kind of channeling, is like, do you really want to go ahead with this?
Well, the problem is when you try, my sensibilities are different than your sensibilities. And if we start to try to curb people from doing stupid stuff, then you're accused of, blocking them, censoring them, right? Not allowing them to be themselves. What I miss, if this is okay to say, is as a producer in my club, I totally had control on what was being said on stage. And if I didn't like something that was being said, then I would stop it and not allow my audience to hear it. Now, it's not called censorship when you own the club. It's called being a producer and choosing what's good and what's bad.
Channeling it.
Right. But in the real world, and now that I'm an old fart, I don't get a chance to control that shit. I have to listen to all the crap to get to the good stuff like everybody else.
Yeah. You got to suffer through a bad season to get to a good show. You got to you got to use your fast forward on your remote clicker just to get to the best scenes in a movie.
Oh, I'm horrible about that. There's a couple shows I watch that I like the action scenes, but they have all this crap soap opera stuff in between. I just fast forward it. I don't care about the character building. I just want to see the excitement part. But that makes me bad in some ways. Not very deep person. Anyway, Cam, so we're losing it. It's been an honor to be here.
We will have you back. We'll do
if everybody gets a chance, check out Stand Up Comedy. Your host and MC. It's a terrific podcast.
Please, everyone do.
Both.
Something for everybody.
Yeah, there's both interviews and actual comedy material from back in the day. I have a short Friday show. It's only 3 to 5 minutes, called Comedy Appetizers, which is a way to start your weekend with a smile. And then, like I said, you can find everything on the Stand Up Comedy Podcast Network.com. And there's videos, podcast, audios. There's even a joke of the day. Sully, you'll find something you like that makes you laugh there.
1000%. Thank you for being on here, and let alone just bringing your all to this and just regurgitating all the nostalgia that we wish we could relive.
Well, thank you for placing it as regurgitation. But yes, it's been a pleasure sharing with your audience some of the memories and people I've had a chance to work with. Hopefully you recognized a couple names because it's been a lot of fun.
Especially when you talked about the Bulldog, I was like, wait, I have seen him. I just didn't know his name.
Bobby Slayton. Yeah.
right? I just was, but you know, anyone who's seen Get Shorty or Ed Wood, you've seen him. But
Right. And Tom McTeague, I mentioned him. He was on the TV show Baywatch for a number of years. He was a stud lifeguard with all the babes on Baywatch back in the 80s.
He was a very happy man, in other words.
But a terrific comic, and
Yes,
now
multi-talented.
retired. But there's a lot of those people that had their 15 minutes of fame, and comedy took them there.
They wear so many hats, and comedy is the one that especially stands out the most.
Right. Hey, Sully, thanks so much for having me on your show. I hope everybody enjoyed the Jacked Up review show
We got
with
jacked up.
Cam Sully and Scott Edwards. We tried to provide you an hour of fun, enlightening comedy entertainment.
In a world where people actually laugh. Two men
We're
got
trying to get it very dramatic.
Yes. Well, would you rather I do shout it? We gotta play it to unleash.
It's so funny you mentioned. I just interviewed Dennis Blair, and he opened up for Rodney Dangerfield for years, and George Carlin, and he was doing some great impressions. But anyway, stay tuned. Check out my stuff. And Sully, thanks for having me on.
Keep buffering people.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up